LaunchPad. We're recording our first ever podcast. We have a big focus here on evidence-based practice, moving evidence from insights into actions, from research into practice. So this podcast is really about that, really unearthing some of the insights that we have from the evidence, from the literature around physical literacy, and talking about how we really put those things into practice on the floor here at MLSE LaunchPad. So I'm Marika Warner, the Director of Research and Evaluation here at MLSE LaunchPad, and I'm sitting here with some staff from our research department, our sport programming team, and one of our community partner organizations. And I'll just let everyone introduce themselves quickly. To my right is Jackie.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jackie Robinson. I am the Coordinator of Research and Evaluation, and yes, that is indeed my real name, and it was purposeful. And here at LaunchPad, I take part in a lot of the measurement and evaluation things that we do on the court with our kids, with our members, and really help to inform those insights to action.
Thank you, Jackie, for that. So, hi everyone. My name is Kwame Otchere. I'm a sport program lead here at LaunchPad, and I've been here since 2019, just pretty much taking the space and was participating here. And now I'm part of that big push to lead sport in post-pandemic. So I'm here and I'm glad to be here. Thank you, Marika. Thank you, Jackie, for being here. Thank you.
I'm Ashleigh Powell. I'm the head of community dance programs at Canada's National Ballet School. And as Marika mentioned, one of the partners that helps provide programming here at MLSE LaunchPad. So my focus is mostly on how dance intersects with physical literacy. So excited to share some thoughts about that today.
All right, so team, let's start off with just a bit of a discussion around the concept of physical literacy and really looking at what it is from each of our different perspectives. It's not a household term, so I think we need to unpack that a little bit to get started. So we know that the definition of physical literacy, textbook definition, is having the motivation, competence, confidence, and knowledge to be physically active for life. But what does that really mean from your perspectives?
Yeah, I think it really means, what is that foundation that we need to build so that youth want to be active now and in the future. So we know that, youth drop out, particularly at that, 12, 13 age point. And physical literacy theoretically should help us, understand why they do. And, you have that motivation and that confidence in movement, that want to move, that desire to move, and then also the physical ability to do it. And theoretically, building physical literacy should help youth to be more active for life, because they're good at it, they want to do it, and they know that they can do it.
I think one of the things that a couple of things drew me to the concept at first. One of them was that it's across the full lifespan. So it's not about, it's about our journey being physical at many different ages and stages, different kinds of abilities, and that we all have the right to learn through and within movement. It's not just that we do it to stay healthy. Of course we do, but we do it because it's the agency that our body has. It's the way we learn. It's often the way we communicate. As a dancer, that kind of resonated with me. That dance and physical activity are a form of communication. And I really like that when I first read Margaret Whitehead's paper on physical literacy, she included so much information about that the context of being physical in terms of what you learn about creativity, what you learn about yourself, what you learn about others. And I think that that's one of the most powerful things I've seen, while of course working on these fundamental skills that can help people engage in any physical activity, is also providing some meaning to that activity, making it fun, making it a learning experience, making it an opportunity for growth beyond just physical change.
Yeah, and I just want to build on some of the thoughts that you shared about communication and movement as communication. And one of the other life skills that we teach here at LaunchPad is social competence, which we think of as, being able to use words, being able to conduct yourself appropriately in social spaces, and physical competence more as being able to use your body, right? But we know that something like 90% of communication is nonverbal. So, we have to sort of consider that physical literacy is also a huge aspect of being socially competent as well. Did you have anything to add there, Kwame?
Yeah, I just feel that, honestly, for my definition, in terms of here at LaunchPad, you start, on the basis of throwing, right? So we talk about throwing and we talk about catching. And from my background as basketball, throwing, leads to, when you're competent, it leads to basketball, right? It leads to baseball. So that's the kind of foundation we set by having, as you mentioned, FMS and having our FMS Carnival, right? We do that to build up upon those concepts and to let them do sports, so you're having fun while you're learning those fundamental movements.
Perfect. Yeah. So Kwame's talking about our FMS, fundamental movement skills, sort of the building blocks of any physical activity that you might want to do later in life. And yeah, that's what it really comes down to. Hey, like having that ability later in life when you're invited to try a new sport or a new physical activity that you've never done before, be able to say, yeah, for sure, let's do this and go for it and be able to achieve it with some degree of competency and enjoy it, most importantly, right?
Yeah. But being able to do the movement is only part of it. And I think, Ashleigh brought this up, around joy and happiness and excitement with doing that physical activity. That's, a whole other piece of that puzzle. There's so many teenagers growing into adulthood who play competitive sports, for example, and there's no doubt about competency there, about the ability to actually do a sport at a high level. And then there's drop-off still. And what is that X factor? And it's really in that motivation, that enjoyment, in wanting to be involved in sport. And I think what physical literacy really contributes to that conversation is a better understanding of that motivation piece, that joy, that happiness, that enjoyment, of movement, of sport, of dance, whatever it may be, of the way that you move your body and communicate with your body.
And from each of you, I'm hearing a lot of things that sort of make me think of self-esteem as well and body image, like how we see our bodies, how we think about our bodies. So for you, what's the connection between physical literacy and body image?
That's a really great question, and it can be a complicated one, and I think dance maybe brings a little bit of baggage to that conversation. When we think about a dancer, we definitely can picture an idealized body. But dance is for every human. Dance is fundamentally a way that humans communicate, tell stories, express themselves. So I think one of the things that's true is as we're using those fundamental movement skills to sort of scaffold people's learning, we're giving them successes along the journey so that there's that opportunity to feel almost right away, as soon as possible, like you accomplished something, you did something, you learned something. And if you move from accomplishment to accomplishment, you can build that capacity. So I think sometimes in a dance perspective, people come in and they'll teach choreography without teaching skills. And then people don't feel the confidence to do it because they don't have what they need to engage in it in a really meaningful way. So when you pull things back and when you think about what are the real basic skills I need somebody to have before I pick up a basketball and start throwing it, or even before we play a game, before we learn a piece of choreography, what do I need to know? And I think that connects to people's self-image, self-concept, self-efficacy, because those little wins along the way are what develop and sustain that motivation. And I think that there's so much that we can offer to young people by giving them that confidence early. But we also have to work on sustaining it ourselves, sustaining it as adults, sustaining it into older adulthood as well, because our bodies are constantly changing and we constantly have to reevaluate our self-image.
We actually have data in-house from LaunchPad with our fundamental movement skills carnival and our measurement of physical literacy that supports that exactly. We start measuring physical literacy at 6 years old, and we measure it all the way up until they're 18. And what we've found is that a 6-year-old's competence can be quite low, which shouldn't be surprising for anyone. Maybe they struggle with bouncing a ball or kicking a ball and doing coordinated movements like that. But given the right structure of a program, the right type of environment, confidence can be gained very, very quickly. And that confidence is sustaining for participation. And that, youth that are confident and show that confidence, doesn't matter what their competence is at, what their actual physical abilities are at. Those grow over time. Those take years. But that confidence, if we can instill that right away, youth come back and they get a lot better.
Yeah. Jackie, on that point, thank you for that. We have a lot of youth here that are really, really motivated to get those moves done. And it builds that confidence over time, right? So you talk about the motivation, and we have a lot of kids here who are really motivated, really high, and they want to pretty much sustain that throughout their lives. So it's pretty, it's great that you bring that up. And even from the age groups, like from 11, 14 to 15, 18, right? That social confidence, again, with your friends, right? That builds over time. So you have that friend group and you have that, I guess, not the success, but you feel like you've done the move, the confidence to do it motivates your group as well as yourself, right? Building a self-esteem, building that social competence piece within the space, for sure.
And so you've just brought up the different age groups. So why don't we go there and have a bit of a discussion about how does physical literacy maybe show up differently in different age groups, in different demographic groups, or in different activity settings? And I'm thinking of, age variations that you just mentioned, also things like cultural variations where, organized sport may not be a traditional activity across all cultures. So it may look a bit different depending on the setting.
When thinking about different ages and stages in dance, we're always working from a creative movement perspective, which means that we ask the kids to create for themselves the movements that they're doing. So we might have a theme or an idea or a piece of music, and we ask them to build a story with us to choose how they express. Within that, there's a lot of opportunity to apply creativity. And I think within creativity comes that opportunity to adapt things to people's different skill levels so that we're providing challenge by choice. So one person's challenging balance may look very different from another person's challenging balance. And every person in the program should feel like they're receiving an appropriate challenge for them that they can build on to get that feeling of success. So I think that that's one of the reasons that physical literacy as a concept is so important for coaches and for people who are working with children, is to understand that it's our responsibility to design the class in a way where different children at different levels can experience a challenge and can grow through that challenge. And sometimes, with younger kids, they may be fearless in terms of movement. They're happy to be upside down and roll around. And you're right, when you brought up that transition of maybe around 12, 13, where we start to become a little more risk averse. So how do we sustain that childlike energy and that idea that I'm just going to try, I'm going to do, I'm going to go? How do we sustain that into those more middle teenage years where people can lose some of that sense of play in movement? I think that's a big question for me, is how you keep a sense of play as children progress from from childhood into youth.
Yeah, very curious if anyone has thoughts on that. And also, Kwame, would love to hear from you, what Ashleigh's talking about ensuring that appropriate challenge. How do you bring that to life in a sports setting?
No, for sure. I mean, we definitely ask a lot of these 6 to 10-year-olds when they're doing movement, and we do have set instruction, but again, bringing the fun with as you progress through the age groups, right? So it's not just we have structured programming, right? We want to be able to have creative expression within sport, right? And making sure that it's not just our set structure, we're set in our ways. We want to make sure that it's even across the board, right? So it's equal play, not just open gym, but it's equal play, and you are involved in that process as the child coming in and giving your input, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think open gym opportunities are really important. And gym is a loose term, but like open moments and opportunities where youth can define what movement engagement is for them. It can be playing basketball. It can be dance. It can be rolling around on the floor. It's all, it comes back to choice, right? And having that confidence that, I can choose today how I want to move. And how I want to act, and sort of use those fundamental skills that I've been learning and try them out in a different way. And I almost think that our structure of how we, as youth get older in particular, there becomes more structured opportunities there. That the only way to engage in activity is through sport, and a particular sport. And so I can't remember what the term is, but you get pushed into lanes of a sport. You get pushed into tracks. You become a competitive basketball player, a competitive hockey player, a competitive soccer player. You name the sport, or a competitive dancer. And there's fewer opportunities for that exploratory movement that we embrace so thoroughly at that young age. How do we make that same environment for older youth? Particularly when there's different competitions for time as well, as youth get older. But I think we do such a good job with for us, our age groups are 6 to 10, but those early life stages, how do we bring that same energy and that same, structure of choice and opportunity for choice and freedom in that movement.
Yeah, and I think in a sports setting, it can be even something as simple as letting the youth play a different position. Like I'm thinking of some qualitative feedback that we collected in our newcomer ball hockey program. One of our fabulous coaches, Corey, collected some of this qualitative feedback a few years back. And we heard some comments from youth who, when they had the opportunity to play goalie, how powerful they felt in their body being in that position, which was just really interesting. And I think it speaks to like that motivation, that spark to want to move. And this may not make it into the podcast, but I'd like to just take a sidebar for a quick second. We're all, adults, some of us getting a little older. So we're all at a different point in our physical literacy journey. We all have our own specific movement backgrounds. So for yourself, is there something for you now as an adult that has, allowed you to continue your physical literacy journey or had to bring that kind of creativity and discovery to your experience of your body?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. So even before that, you mentioned the cultural aspect of physical movement, physical literacy. For sure, I can obviously talk about my experience just being a Black kid and on the west side of the city. Basketball was our big focus, and if honestly it was like if you weren't playing basketball, if you weren't playing soccer, if you weren't playing those top sports, you weren't it, or you weren't that in school, right? So I love how LaunchPad includes everything from ball hockey so that everyone gets to play, everyone gets to experience that same thing, and it's equitable across the board, right? And also having sharing dance, new leaf yoga, right? We give everyone an opportunity to experience something different, not just the sports that I grew up playing, was just basketball, the core sports. So my physical journey, again, as I said, was just pretty much playing basketball, but being exposed to volleyball, which I love, pretty much same skills of, jumping and hitting and throwing, right? So no, it's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think being a learner makes you a better teacher. So I do try. I won't deny that. The journey with physical literacy is a relationship that shifts over time. It shifted a lot during COVID. When we had to move into a virtual context and we weren't able to engage in the space and engage in movement in the same way we had before, that was a loss. I didn't quite understand until we got back to being in person and got to feel what we were missing. So it is a journey, and there are moments where you don't feel as motivated and moments where you reconnect. But I like to think that my students and the young people I work with are taking a risk and trying something new. And it helps me know what they feel like if I take risks in my life and try new things and try new ways of moving and new opportunities and not to fear the possibility of participating in something new. So now I'm the type of person that's like, yeah, I'll try. I used to really never play a sport because I was so scared of doing something wrong or not being good that I removed myself from sport as a teenager, as a young woman. And dance became my physical outlet. But now I see sort of how I was a statistic, I was one of those people who disconnected from sport because I lacked confidence. I lacked some of the basic skills to feel like I was accomplishing things. So luckily enough, I found dance, and that's been my core way of being physical. But now I'm appreciating so much now the opportunity to learn about other sports and try other things.
And I'll fully admit I am a recovering competitive athlete, as I like to think of it. I played a lot of sports growing up and played them a lot. And by a lot of sports, I mean like very few, but all the time. And I was in the rink. I was on the field every day of the week, if not multiple times during that day. And I was talking earlier about tracking and being in like a sport track. And how that can actually limit us. I'm personally experiencing that, where that sport is no longer available to me as an adult. It's not easy on the body as you get older, but also just like physically, right? Your, work, life, everything keeps you out of, can keep you out of competitive sport in that way. And honestly, it's reconnecting with play as an adult, which is something that is challenging to do. And I don't necessarily mean going to a trampoline park, although Marika and I have definitely gone to a trampoline park. And it was the best and so much fun. If you haven't gone, highly recommend it, although also not easy on the body, but super fun. Just, doing things because you enjoy them not because it'll help you get in shape or because it'll make you a better, hockey player, basketball player, doing things because you enjoy the movement of your body. That has been sort of, a roller coaster of coming back to it. And I think the pandemic has given the opportunity to really lean into that. It's like, I have time now. I have that time when I would have been maybe commuting to work. And now I can do something else. And what do I want to do with that time? And exploring play and exploring movement again has been really, really great.
Awesome, team. Great sidebar. Okay, so we've had some great chat about some of the really important aspects of physical literacy, from the confidence, motivation, the physical competence as well. But I kind of want to get next at the so what of all this. So why is all of this so important? Yes, great that youth can play sports, try a range of different activities, but at the end of the day, why does this matter?
I think measurement matters, and I applaud what you guys are doing at MLSE and how you connect evaluation and data into the way you design programs, and that's something we try to do also at the ballet school. We can make assumptions all the time about why a kid isn't participating. Oh, they dropped out because they're really serious about school. We make assumptions. We tell stories to ourselves about why children may have made a decision in one way or another. And when we dig deeper, when we ask hard questions, when we look for evidence to support what we're doing, I think we become better providers of this kind of opportunity to be physical, whether it's physical activity, sport, physical literacy, dance. All of it has to be done with integrity and intention, and that only happens when you really get to know the people you're working with and understand the skills they're developing and the skills they're not developing, and their self-concept, and all of that work is really important. And I think it makes for those safe spaces and good opportunities that we've all been talking about, when we're able to measure and evaluate and say, no, we're actually doing what we intended to do. We're not unintentionally causing harm. We're not making poor choices, because as beautiful as dance, sport, all these opportunities to be physical are, there are times when delivered poorly, it can cause harm rather than good. And I think we really have to look at ourselves and look at the children and make sure we're making the right kinds of choices for them. And I think physical literacy provides a framework for that.
That's such a great point. I think physical literacy shifts the blame of youth dropout from youth back onto program providers, sport organizations, coaches, everyone involved in the sport apparatus or physical activity apparatus, that isn't the youth themselves, because that's too simple of an explanation. And if that were the case, youth would stay in sport, because there's no denying that they want to be involved in sport, but there's something about the system that is not responsive to them. We're not giving them the right skills to enjoy it for long term, to want to come back. And so focusing on physical literacy as one aspect of the way we intentionally provide programming and opportunities can really help us to better understand how to build programs that youth want to participate in, that are giving them the tools that can help them succeed in the long term.
Ain't that the truth?
No, for sure. And even on the coaching side, right, I want that feedback just to know that I'm doing a good job or I'm not doing a good job, right? Hold me accountable to that action. And if I'm not doing a great job, like, what am I doing wrong that is making this kid not come back, or making this kid not have this great experience, right? So even with me, like in basketball, when I was younger, I didn't have the best coaches, and there was no onus on the provider, the coaches, the assistant coaches, the teachers, right, to say like, hey, you're not doing a good job, right? So it's very easy to shift the blame on the kids who are not in sport or not doing it. So it definitely holds all of us accountable, and it keeps us going, and it keeps me just having that information to take back to my team and be like, hey, let's do it the right way so that these kids can stay in sport like I stayed in sport, just because I had that positive experience that I had at camp or at LaunchPad.
This is blowing my mind, folks. So, we do make a lot of parallels between literacy, reading and writing, and physical literacy. So it's exactly the case. Like, if a youth graduates from high school unable to read, which happens, whose fault is that? It's the school's fault. If a young woman graduates from ballet school unable to play sports, whose fault is that? So yeah, this is very interesting. And then I'm also thinking about, the way that physical literacy is connected to such a range of other key positive life outcomes, all the way from personal income to quality of life expectancy, and everything in between. So if folks want to maybe just quickly draw some connections between physical literacy and other really important life outcomes, and how you see that.
And I think one of the things that I think of when thinking about outcomes, and we haven't talked about this a lot yet, but in terms of physical literacy, but I think also that kind of framework that provides activity at any ability, because we all know that there's young people living with disability, there's older adults living with disabilities or challenges, but everybody can move and be physical. It may look different on different people, but the physical literacy framework has space for people who may move differently or need to make different choices. And I think there's a lot of movement in sport that's focusing on bringing people of all abilities into the space. That's something that we're doing in dance as well. And so I think that's a very important thing when thinking about what it contributes to our life, is we're not always going to be at our best level of ability. What is the framework that allows us to be physical, knowing that how we are physical over our lifespan is going to change and adapt? I have the pleasure of teaching dance to people in their 80s and 90s, and the agency that they gain by being in control of their movement, when you're that age or you're in a long-term care home, it's somebody else who tells you how to move and when to move, and now we're going to do this, and now you have to go here. I think it's the same thing with kids. They spend a lot of their day being told to line up, being told to do, having the agency of their movement restricted by some of the structure of how their lives are. So that opportunity to give someone agency over their body, I think it's really empowering. And I have no idea, Marika, if I in any way answered your question. But
Oh, you absolutely did. So what I'm getting here is a program that's structured around physical literacy. One of the outcomes is inclusion and building a more inclusive approach.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's physical literacy allows for that space for inclusion. It creates a framework that allows that to happen, which I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Right. I just feel like when we talk about inclusion, right, we need to pretty much talk about sport being available to everybody. Everyone should have access to sport, and not people in certain geographical areas, right? I want everyone to have sport set for everywhere, and it's equal across the board. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, inclusion and equity.
Right.
Yeah. And the importance of physical literacy really comes down to engagement in physical activity. We know that people that are more physically active in their youth are less likely to have heart disease, type 2 diabetes as an adult. Youth that engage in sport are more likely to graduate from high school, are more likely to achieve employment, and all of these really big life outcomes that physical literacy as a moderator can help get there. And it's not the only explanation, obviously, but engagement in sport and physical activities is very important for those longer term outcomes.
Great. Okay. So here at LaunchPad, we treat physical literacy as a life skill, which is a fairly unique approach in our space. We also treat it as a social determinant of health here. And that's something that is popping up more and more in the physical literacy and physical education literature. So social determinants of health are the non-medical factors that impact health outcomes. So for us, that's how physical literacy really does fit the definition of a modifiable social determinant of health. But I want to talk a bit about the life skill piece. Here at LaunchPad, we use a life skills coaching methodology, including in the Sharing Dance program. So can we speak a bit about why is it that we treat physical literacy as a life skill? And what does that offer us?
I have a silly example of how physical literacy is a life skill. On the way here, I was rushing and I slipped on the ice and fell on my butt. But I know how to fall. And so I fell on, a soft part and got myself back up and ran on. You need to explore your physical capacity to navigate the world with grace. That's something that's why it's a life skill, because you got to run up the subway stairs, or you've got to, it brings it lets you access the world in a different way when you have that physical competence. And again, including all abilities too. So it's not just about who runs the fastest, who runs the furthest. It is about knowing my body and exploring its capabilities and moving in the world with confidence. I think that's why it's a life skill.
Yeah, if I may add on, you talked about it, like being in challenging situations, right? Here we have a lot of life skills: perseverance, grit, self-esteem. We pretty much organize structured games based on the basis that it's difficult. It's not easy to play, so that we give these youth challenges, and once they do it, they feel accomplished. They feel good about themselves because they did it as a team and they did it individually, right? So we teach that on basis of the sport itself and reflecting back on, okay, so how did the sport go or the game go? What went well? What didn't go well? What were the challenges? How do you overcome it? So that's where I use the life skill here when I coach at LaunchPad, and I feel that it's not just here at LaunchPad. It's essential everywhere at all ages throughout your life, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, physical literacy becomes an access point, right, for engaging in activity for life. And as well, it's intrinsically connected to all other life skills. I mean, talk about the confidence around physical activity. That's self-esteem. And motivation, in a sense, that's resilience. That's grit. And being able to sort of package those things together to engage in physical activity and to take those learnings from physical literacy that you've learned from a very, very young age and apply them to other aspects of your life. If you can be confident in movement, maybe you can be confident in school. You can be confident in lots of new scenarios. And it's really that foundation for a lot of other life skills as well.
Perfect. Okay, let's get a little bit more nitty gritty. Maybe thinking of a listener who's a parent, an early childhood educator, a teacher, a coach, etc. How do we teach physical literacy for someone who is working with young people and maybe hasn't brought that piece to their practice?
I think one of the fun things is that it doesn't have to be designated time. So I think often we think of in gym class, that's where we're going to learn. Or I think the way to get fun and creative about it is to think about all the times in the day our body moves through space, and how do we then make that more fun, more challenging. If you have to line up and walk down the hallway, can you hop on one leg down the hallway today and hop on the other leg when you come back from math class? And can you integrate it? I know there's often this idea in school of having brain breaks, where you get up and move. And while I love that, I don't like the name brain break, because what we're doing is absolutely active in our mind. Like, we learn while we move, we learn through movement. So I think having the opportunity to take concepts that you're trying to teach students, even if you're trying to teach them, the water cycle, maybe they stand up and move like water and then evaporate up and then they rain down, and they learned it, but they got up, they moved, they didn't just learn it, anchored in their seat. So I think a lot of it needs to be about creatively thinking about opportunities to move and just adding them in everywhere you can in the day, so that there's as little sort of sitting still as possible, especially for kids, but for grown-ups too, right? Especially during COVID, we need our opportunities to move as well.
No, you're definitely right there. And I think with COVID and it being challenged, we've had to adapt, right? And even on our end as coaches, we've had to adapt in our living rooms, right? So we're like, hey, grab a sock, do this, right? So by changing the environment, not being here physically, we're able to adapt in our environment, be like, hey, grab this book, grab this chair, grab this. So we're learning it all across the board, everywhere in our homes, outside, right? So it's great that, change the environment, and then you'll have a better viewpoint when you look at it, and you're able to participate more, just because you're knowing that it's not at a set or it's a set thing or a set movement or a set time, right? It's everywhere, all the time, anywhere.
Yeah. That's such a great point. Physical literacy is not just when I'm in basketball. Physical literacy is life, right? Like, it's in every moment of life. And quite frankly, physically literate parents create physically literate children. And as much as, physical literacy is very much like it's a lifespan, but we focus very much at a young age on that. As adults, it's our responsibility as well to set that foundation, to make it fun, to find those things, hopscotch, or when you were a kid and you didn't want to step on the cracks when you were walking the sidewalk. Like, that's an example of like ways that you can incorporate those basic fundamental movements that really build into larger competencies down the line.
And the crack, yeah. You make me think of, so I have these neighbors who, as soon as it gets to about October, they drive their kids to school every day, which is a 6-minute walk from my home, so the same from theirs. And yeah, just as good. So, and I think of this concept as well that I want to mention of surplus safety, where I think there is like a lot of surplus safety in the world right now in how we manage children. And yes, I let my son climb up onto the kitchen counter. I let him jump on the bed. I gave him a balance bike when he was 1 year old. We do go tobogganing in the dark because it gets dark at 5 o'clock. So, like really doing these things that might be seen as risky, because what's the other risk? Not developing physical literacy, not developing health and physical competence. So great. That's all really great. Now I want to hear a little bit, and I think all of you have important points to add here, but maybe I'll start with Jackie. Being a researcher, how do you measure physical literacy, and what are some of the challenges there?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a big question, right? I think we kind of have a good understanding about what physical literacy should look like, and theoretically what we should be seeing if we're seeing impacts on physical literacy. But there's a lot up in the air. How do you actually accurately measure something like motivation when motivation is such an individual construct? How do you measure confidence? And particularly for physical literacy, it's confidence that spans contexts, that isn't just applicable to one space. And so, how do you do that? I think we've really nailed down that competency part. Although there's some methodological things that I think we can improve on. You can ask a kid to, jump on one foot, and you can tell whether or not they can do it. You can ask them to dribble a basketball, and you can tell whether or not they can do it. And those are those fundamental movements, but that doesn't really make someone physically literate necessarily on its own. How do you actually connect those movements, right? So in order to play basketball, you need to be able to run and dribble at the same time while also looking around for a pass. For dance, you have to string together multiple movements. And so it's not just being able to move your leg in one direction, but it's also being able to move your arm and your torso at a similar time, coordinated to music or to a certain beat. And so I think we haven't really figured out how to measure that at a competency level, but those, fundamental things, to an extent, we have figured it out a little bit. Here at LaunchPad, we have this fun carnival. And we call it our FMS carnival, our Fundamental Movement Skills Carnival, where we actually assess all of these fundamental movements, and it's a super great engaging time. It takes about an hour. We end up getting about 100 kids that come through and do the assessment, and our coaches are incredible, and there's music and prizes, and the youth have a great time. But what we found is that maybe a better way to actually measure this is in program. Have them do obstacle courses where they string together multiple movements. That carnival is really great for measuring 6-year-olds, but thoroughly ineffective at measuring a 14-year-old, because they don't want to come and kick a ball into a net. They want to come and play a sport, or they want to come and dance, or they want to do some rock climbing. And so what we've been really challenged to figure out is for those older youth, how do we measure the stringing together of those fundamental skills from a competency standpoint? And like I said, like the motivation and confidence pieces, I don't know, Marika, Kwame, Ashleigh, if you have any thoughts, because it's a big thing that's up in the air for us of what that actually looks like.
I can tell you what it looks like. I guess honestly, when you have our games, we have kids that are not necessarily able to perform movement completely, but it's having fun and still talking to the kids and still doing the movements and keep learning, keep trying. So, auntie, it's fun, and you could tell by the smile on their faces. Those are things I can measure, right? If they're having fun or not, and whether or not to keep going, they completely keep going, and they keep doing it and they keep enjoying it. So I don't have a definition for you as well, but it's what I see as a coach and what I honestly build off of for the next program. They're having fun. Okay, you're having fun. Great. So now let's work on perfecting that move. And if you're not, okay, we can find ways to do that, and we can easily sort of manage that over time. So it's not just do this movement now, but it's a gradual improvement over the time. And I think that if you measure it that way, then I think that's great. Just knowing from when they first start a program to the end of the program, how they're doing over that span of time is great.
Yeah, and you're right. As a teacher or a coach, you often get a sense of how people are doing, and you always come away with stories, right? Of that child who took that risk, who took that step, and that's what keeps us motivated to keep doing what we're doing. In terms of measurement, I do find some of the measurement of physical literacy challenging in the sense that it measures the physical skill, but doesn't measure some of those actually equally, if not more important things about your belief in yourself, your self-efficacy related to movement. I think that's why that the qualitative experiences of those kids' focus groups and getting them to actually say themselves how they're feeling is so important, and always bringing in a qualitative lens when we're looking at measurement as well. For dance, one of the things that I think we find challenging in terms of measurement is that so much of what we are working on is movement creativity, is their ability to make choices with their body. So it's the connection between, yes, the fundamental skills of I can gallop, skip, hop, roll, drop to the floor, and get back up again. But it's also can I connect that to an idea of skipping over a brook and rolling over it? Like, can I connect it to my mental process? Can I connect it to communication and expression? So that to me is another challenge in terms of measurement, in addition to what you said about measuring confidence and competence being a challenge. I think also measuring beyond the individual skill into their ability to apply those skills, kind of. I guess that's what I'm saying, is their ownership of those skills, not just their ability to accomplish a task when offered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then to transfer it to another sport context or activity. Yeah.
It's like the essay version of a test versus the multiple choice, right? Like, I can recognize the answer, but can I actually bring it up when asked, or in any other moment, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, I think that takes us pretty much to the end of the conversation. Maybe I'll just do a quick go around. If there's anything from the discussion today that you want to point out and say, this is the most important message about physical literacy that I want folks to take away from listening to this podcast, or anything new you want to bring in, now's your moment. And for myself, I'm going to go back to a Kwame quote, which is everywhere, all the time, anywhere. And I think to me, that's the most important thing about physical literacy. Just to carry it with us through our entire lives and our everyday.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's my point as well. And particularly as we, fingers crossed, come into a post-pandemic world and hopefully, re-engaging and coming back in person and giving youth those opportunities to engage in different spaces than they have before. Encouraging them to be adventurous, that this is an everyday, all the time thing, and taking those learnings and applying them.
Yeah. If I may, yes, I completely agree. And I just feel that also that when they do come into space, you have to be encouraging as a coach, as a service provider. You have to be post-pandemic coming in, not the grace activity level, right? Coming back and just, hey, like, encouraging the play again, encouraging the fun again of sport, and not just the measurement part of like, hey, you're not doing this correctly, or hey, you're not doing that. Just introducing that full play and letting them be open to being adventurous, having fun, showing creativity, right? So that's pretty much my message for not just the kids that come in, but for everyone who comes into space and comes to the office, has fun, has that openness to learn as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, I think I would say that keeping in mind that we're learning to, but we're learning through. And they have to be equally important. You have to learn through what you're doing in addition to learning to. So yes, those fundamental movement skills are important. We have to learn to skip, throw, catch, leap. But we have to learn through the process that we have the capacity, we have the skills, we can try new things. So So that, I think that for me is what brings physical literacy into a space where I find it really valuable in the work that we're doing.
Fantastic. What a treat to get to chat for an hour with three people as equally passionate as myself about physical literacy. So many thanks to Jackie, Kwame, Ashleigh, and also big thanks to some folks supporting us behind the scenes, Corey, Brian, Ian, and Matt. And thanks to you for listening. Stay tuned.